talk about a couple things before we get into the pattern, selecting sheepskin, and all that other information. I've been repairing coats and making a lot of sheepskin stuff for a long time. So I realized where the weakest spots would have been on this coat. It'll say in the pattern to make these back of the sleeves out of a tough piece. But more than that, I've seen pockets rip. So I have these reinforced. That's in the pattern. The buttonholes, but even more so the buttons themselves. There's an actual reinforcement piece behind there as well. And then the collar, where the two collars come together, there's a reinforcement piece. I wanted to make sure this was going to be as durable as I possibly could get it. So the length of the coat too, I went with something a little longer instead of just a waist length, because then it isn't as crucial to try to dial in that size. If you're shorter, the coat will be just a little bit longer. If you're very tall, the coat will be a little bit shorter, but it's not going to be too short or too long. Same with the sleeves. They're starting long, and if you want to have more of a standard length, this is how I wear it. You fold this up, and you can fold it up a little higher if you want. The pattern also has another row of holes right here, so if you want the whole sleeve itself just to be shorter, and then you could still fold it and such, you could do that. Like, let's say you have shorter arms. I suggest waiting if you are going to make the shorter sleeves. Just make your coat and see how long the sleeves are, see if you like it folded up or not, and you can come back and just strip those stitches, because those ones right there, those holes, are the holes that will be used for the secondary shorter version. You'll just punch with the pattern, mark the holes, punch them on your sleeve, strip those stitches, and you'll cut right below those first set of holes, and then it'll just fold up one more time and sew exactly like this cuff is done. And if you're not sure, you can wait to do that stitch, because that you'll do the whole sleeve, and then that last hem here is done after the fact. So you can just leave that hem until the end to see if you want to put those other holes in there, and then just go up one more. I think it's an inch and a half. To get started, you are going to take a chest measurement, which is right up underneath your armpits, around your chest, not around your arms. And you're going to take a belly measurement, which is right around your belly button. That's so the coat could be more dialed in for as many body types as possible. If there's a huge discrepancy between the belly measurement and the chest measurement when you're looking at the sizing, let's say your belly measurement is like 3 sizes too big past what the chest measurement size would give you, the coat's going to fit baggy on the shoulders and across the chest. You could still go that route, but I just wanted to mention that. So when you do get to that point where you're picking out the exact size you want, it is designed for, like I said, t-shirts. If you take your measurement with your t-shirt and that's what you plan on wearing, you can go off those exact measurements on the pattern. If you are going to wear real thick sweaters and stuff, you're going to want to go up a size. And I added extra sizes in between a couple of them, so there's stuff from extra small all the way to XXX extra large. But there are some in between, so instead of just making these big jumps, they're smaller jumps, so you can really dial in the sizing. If you want to wear sweaters, just go up a size. If you're right in between the two measurements, you should be able to wear some thicker garments underneath your coat. But if you're towards the high end, definitely go up that size. With that said, these patterns are the leathercraft style patterns with all the holes. So it's more of a do-it-yourself craft style pattern. You're not going to have to try to figure out all the complexities of making a sheepskin coat from scratch. Everything's figured out for you, measurements, all the stitching holes. You just got to cut your parts out, follow along with the video, and you can have a sheepskin coat. You're going to want to cut your pattern out, cut your parts out, and since I do suggest doing a hat or some slippers or something first before you tackle this coat, I won't cover that in this video, but you can go watch the slipper video, and that will show you exactly how to do all this, get your parts cut out and stuff. One of the only differences is going to be these pens. I use different pens now. I get a big pack of these white ones for pretty cheap. They do go through ink a little bit quicker, but they stay more on the surface instead of penetrating quite as far, so I don't have to heat treat this to get rid of those pens. However, these are heat erasable ones just like the other ones. But once I'm done sewing stuff together, you see the tick marks. If there's white, you can just gently scratch it off. I'll get it going with the needle just real gently. And by the time I'm done sewing and stuff, that's gone. You do have to be a little bit more careful for rubbing off the tick marks, but that's just another reason to hold on to the pattern parts, so if you ever need to go back and retrace those. As far as the sewing goes, I did make a little short video because I did a ridiculous amount of tests. That short little video talks about the different ways to sew sheepskin, so you might want to check that out just to make sure you're sewing it the way that could be the strongest, or just see what your options are. There's also a lot of ways you can cut this stuff out, like the professionals will use a sharp razor blade, just like place their pattern down. But I found a nice sharp pair of scissors, which that's the way I still do it. For beginners or just intermediate in general, you get better results with a nice pair of scissors, and again, I show that in the slipper video. To get started, you'll want to select some decent sheepskin. I get all mine from Weaver. I can put a link below so you can go right to it if you want. I like to give it the pinch test. Try not to grab a bunch of wool underneath, just to kind of check that density of the skin. And some skins will be decent in the middle but get real thin. They're all going to be a little bit thinner towards the edge, but as long as you feel like you can get pretty close, you'll be good. And you can always cut like slippers, mittens and things more from the edges, the thinner sections, and keep just the middle part to cut your coat parts out of. And I like to do a couple things at a time so that I can lay the parts out and really get as much use out of my sheepskin as possible. The coat, there will be parts that are going to be more important than others. I'll mark a couple on the pattern itself, but like the back section, bottom parts, not as important to have a real nice dense section. You don't want it too thin, but buttonholes and I like the collar, the top to be a little bit more dense. It'll be marked on the pattern, but the hardest part, or the part that will be taking the most abuse, is going to be the back of the arms and across the back where those two seams come together, because you're reaching forward a lot and it's going to pull that section apart. So if you're able to get a good amount of sections cut from the middle, you can keep the little bit thinner parts for your mittens and trapper hats and things. With that said, I will have the square footage for each pattern. The different sizes are going to be different. So each pattern itself for the size will tell you the square footage. However, you're definitely going to want more than what's suggested or what it says is required, because there's going to be parts you can't use. And you can see here I got some marked where the wool is just too thin. And with that said, if the skin part is still thick enough, you can save it for certain things that don't need the fur on. And for those, you're going to want to trim the fur first before you cut the parts out. It's a little bit easier. If you haven't done any sheepskin patterns of mine before, I would suggest grabbing one of the other ones first before you jump into this coat, just to get an idea of how everything's going to work. The only real difference is going to be a couple things while you're sewing. The jacket is going to have just a couple different ways to sew, an extra step, and I ended up finishing the stitches just a little bit different, pretty much the same. And on top of that, if you do know you're going to make a coat, you can grab another pattern, mittens or something, and lay the patterns out at the same time to really make sure you're getting the most out of your skins. So as you're laying your parts out, if there's a section, buttonholes are important. Well, like I said, the back of the arm where it attaches to the back of the coat, that's going to be important. That's marked on the pattern. You don't have to have that entire part cut directly out of the strongest part of the hide, that center section. You can, like I like this part to be a little more durable, so I'll position that to a stronger part and then just have this go out towards the edge. It doesn't have to be quite as thick, keeping in mind that, you know, however durable your sheepskin is, that's how durable your coat's going to be. But taking a few extra steps is always good. There will be a handful of smaller parts that will have the fur completely removed. And what I'll do for those, it's good to have these out of a good durable section. Grab a piece, shave all of the fur off of it before you cut this stuff out. It's a lot easier than having it cut out and trying to shave each one of these pieces individually. As you're cutting these parts out, you can see I kept the pattern on top of them. It really helps with the organization. It also helps for when you're cutting out the opposite side, the mirrored image of this, because then you can kind of check and keep it kind of similar in density. It's not like super important, but having them somewhat similar does kind of help the overall coat look nice. Once you're completely done with the coat, it's a good idea to be gentle with it for some time, just to give the stitches time to kind of set in, let the sheepskin kind of stretch where it needs to. If you try to force it to stretch too quickly, one part might stretch too hard. You could even damage it. Give it some time to get used to that shape and to stretch into the form. Those stitches will set in real nice, and it'll be good if you just give it that time. Another thing I like about this pattern is any individual part, if it gets stained or damaged, you can remove that section and replace it relatively easy versus some of the sewing machine patterns. However, this can be done on a sewing machine as well. You would just, let's say this piece is damaged, I would cut the stitching back a little bit and pull it so I have some lengths to tie a knot, and then I can just add that piece right back into the coat. There are a couple things you'll want to trim up before you get going. I left this corner because at that corner and any other sharp corners like that, I like to use a hole punch right there and then finish that cut so I'm not cutting, leaving. It could be cut past it. Makes it easier to rip. Not that it's a huge deal, but hole punch there. Every little bit will help to keep this coat really nice. And anytime, this one isn't trimmed yet, but anytime you have a fold over, like on the cuff, this will be folded over right here. You're going to want to trim this fur underneath to that halfway point. And what I like to do if I'm trimming, you can see I have a mark for if I'm doing the internal seam where it's turned in. You do want to trim back just to those holes. That's what that mark is for. But what I like to do too is you can visually take a look at the razor, or you can even use scissors and take your time with it. Look at about how far back that's going to be. So as I'm cutting this, I know exactly where to stop. And usually I'll kind of get it going first, just so I have something to grab onto. Be real careful as you're going. If you're lifting this up and just going, you could cut the skin itself. Get rid of that excess. You don't want it floating around on you. Then take a look at how far back on the razor I want to go. And you can even mark it with a pen or a marker. It's like halfway right there. So then I know as I'm doing this, I look at the edge of the skin and just go that far. So it goes right to that halfway spot. That way, when we fold this over, that's not going to be too dense right there. It'll have a nice look to it as we're sewing that. It'll be the cuffs and the top of the pockets will also be done like that. So you're going to be using a hole punch. I use a 1mm, 0.8 is fine too. I don't like to go too small, but you don't want to go too big either. So all the holes are going to be done like that. The tiny holes right next to the button slots, I just leave that pen because I can use a round stitching awl instead as I go. A little harder to see, but you want those holes to be a little bit smaller. And the same with that opposite piece where the button's itself attached to. There's going to be 4 holes. I just leave those to do with an awl right before I put the buttons on. So there's going to be a couple sections you can trim if you want. You don't have to. You can do it prior. So you can see this is kind of how the arm will be on the coat. That's the high point. So from about here to here, right under the arm, you can trim the wool down a little bit if you don't want it as thick. The coat will be fine as is. Personal preference, I leave it alone. And you can see here's one of those completed cuffs we were talking about when you trim that wool underneath. But with that said, you're going to have some options for sewing. You can sew it on a machine. And I do have a video that I talk about different sewing techniques and stuff. You can check that out. It's just a quick little short video. But I like the double whip stitch, and then I do a saddle stitch on top of it. Crazy strong. I talk about that in that other little short video. if you're going to do just one stitch, your sheepskin's strong, you're not worried about it, just the saddle stitch is what I would recommend. A whip stitch or a double whip stitch could be all right, but check that other video out before you decide how you're going to sew this up. If you do it on a machine with like the saddle stitch is going to be pretty strong, and any seam you do can be turned in like that, or it can be turned out like this, and either way, I like to still go over the top of that with a double whip just to really hold everything. You can get away with just the saddle stitch, but I'd much rather have it stronger than I need than not strong enough. With that said, if you are going to be turning edges in, you'll want to trim those right past the holes. And you can see I did that on here because where it attaches to the coat, it's going to be turned in that seam. And when I do that, I like to mark on my razor here. You can use scissors too and take your time, but I'll go in and make sure that just goes barely past those holes. Remember where that mark is. And just be real careful. The biggest issue with doing this is as you're going, if you're pulling this up, you could dig into that skin and start to cut it with that shaver a little bit. So just be real careful and vigilant of that. If you do turn some of these in, I only suggest doing the inside part of the arm here, the shorter part, and we'll cover that when we get sewing, and where the arm attaches to the jacket itself, the main body. Grab all the parts for one of the arms, and we'll do one arm and then we'll just do the other side. But we'll need to trim this a little bit, and in the beginning I did show how to trim this down a little. I'm going to trim the other side. Get rid of these for now, but hold on to your pattern parts. So again, I'll just start a little bit so I have something to grab onto as I'm doing this. Or take a look at how far back I want to go so I can just be careful. You can always go a little more, but if you go way too deep, there's nothing you can really do except remake that part. Getting rid of the excess as much as you can. Don't yank on it, but just gently pull and work that off of there so it's not floating around. And I'll kind of just give it a test and see how far back that goes. Should be good. You're going to grab your two parts. This is going to be the outside left top arm and outside left bottom arm. As far as the length goes, if you're going across with that double loop stitch, it's going to be 5 times the length. The saddle stitch is going to be 3 times the length. And if it's just a real short section like this, I'll just go ahead and grab 8 times the length and put a needle on each side, so I can just go down and back and have the double loop and the saddle stitch all done in one swipe. I use machine thread. I think this is a 207, might be a 277, but I add a little bit of wax to it. If you're using like a leather hand sewing thread from Main Thread, it would be probably a 0.03. But really, whatever you want to choose works. If you go too thin, it might cut through the leather a little bit more. Something with some body to it is definitely better. Looks better too. Just looking to make sure those holes stay lined up. You're starting with the edge there. I like to go clips all the way down, because then it just kind of holds everything where I want it to be. As you're looping the stitch around, it can pull them out of whack just a little bit. Not a huge deal. This is just the way I like to do it. Rather go too many clips than not enough. And there are tick marks for while you're clipping stuff together on any parts that are a little bit more easing and lining up rounded sections, but the straight parts that are real easy won't have those tick marks on it. You won't really need those. I'll just take a look at those holes, make sure they're lining up. You can also count a few holes out and mark it if you want. You'll notice too, where I put the clips is right where the stitches are going to go. I don't clip back real far, just in case it marks the leather a little bit. That'll get hidden. I don't think I've ever had an issue with that, but you know, better safe than sorry. Just pick a side to start on. I'll go through that hole a second time. Once just straight over the top, and then I'll go again and go around the outside here. Throw a clip on there just to hold it. Then I'll start with the single loop and I'll go down a little bit and then I'll do the other needle. Just make sure it's going straight and looks nice and uniform. I like to put my finger behind it as I pull, snug it up, and you'll feel it snug up and then it'll kind of stop. You do want to give it that little bit of extra, but don't yank on it. Try to tear the stitches out. Just get it good and snug. Now, I'm pulling pretty hard, but just be careful of that. And you know, if you're questioning it, just do a test piece or something. As I'm coming with the other one, I just make sure it crosses over right at the top of that seam. Looks nice and uniform. As you're tightening these stitches, try to match that first stitch. So if you go too loose, you'll notice a difference. Just throw a clip on there to hold those stitches tight. Usually I'll throw a clip anytime I stop. I'll throw a clip back behind a couple stitches. And it can be helpful. Throw something underneath there just to raise it up a little bit. I'll just continue down all the way to the other end. I'll show you how I finish the edge and turn back the other way. Okay. If you were doing a longer piece, you would stop and tie a knot. But I'm doing a shorter one, so I did that full 8 times the length so I can get to the end and just saddle stitch back. So again, over the top, after we get to the end here. So let me put a clip. I like to throw a clip kind of down a little bit. So going through that whole second time. This is the one that goes straight over the top. And again, around the outside. And I'll just stick that clip right on there for a sec while I get this one up to that end. Now, usually I would go to the other side, tie a little knot. I'll show you how I do that when we get back to this side. But since this was a short section, we're just coming down and going all the way back with the saddle stitch. So instead of going looping around, we're just going straight through now. And same as if you're sewing a wallet or anything else. Every time you come through from one side, hold that thread the same way and always come through the same side the same way. It'll just look a little bit nicer. And as you're pulling this saddle stitch, you want to see just a little bit of bunching up, and I'll show you as we're going here, because then as you stretch and set those stitches in, that seam will be nice and tight. See, I'm getting it to bunch just a little bit. And there's going to be quite a bit of variety in density of the skin. And you'll notice if it's real thick parts, higher density, you pull a little bit harder. And if your skin is a little bit thinner, you're not going to have to pull as hard. So more or less just keep an eye on how much it's bunching versus how hard you're pulling on these stitches. The other thing too is while you're finding that hole, be a little gentle. Don't just force it through. You could miss it and puncture the skin. Just take a peek and make sure you're coming through correctly. So I got to that last hole. If you forgot to go over the top or around the back of that seam, you can do that with one of these needles now. But since I did the top and around the back before, I can stop right there and I'll actually go back one stitch and come straight through to the inside. And I'll hide that knot down into the fur. What I like to do is you can prop this up a little, but grab one thread and just find where it's coming through here. the other thread. Just kind of get that out of the way so that knot can get down in there a bit. That first part of this box knot, go through twice. That's really going to hold that snug so it doesn't loosen up on you. And then I'll start the second and then throw just a dab of glue in there. Get down in there, just the tiniest dab of glue, just so that knot stays. You can leave that, let it dry, and then snip these, or snip them kind of close. If you snip too close, you're just going to lose that knot. And it's hidden down in there. So with that little bit of bunching, not a ton, just the tiniest bit, we can stretch it out, be gentle with it. You're not pulling and yanking on it. Just to stretch that out, and it locks those stitches in nicely. We'll do that exact same thing to the inside left top arm, and this is the inside left bottom arm. So this time the shorter part's on top. This is one of the next two parts. Make sure you're shaving that cuff section of the fur back before you jump into the next step. Okay, that side's done. Now, putting these two sides together, obviously there's a short side and a long side. This short side is the side, if you're going to turn the seams in, that short is the one, there's a completed sleeve. That's the one I think would be better off with the turned in edge, because that's more inside the arm. This is kind of the outside of the arm. Technically, you can do all or any seams turned in like that. I only suggest doing two seams, this one on the inside of the arm and where the arm attaches to the jacket itself. And technically, you could do all of them that way, but it takes a little bit more time and it's a little bit more cumbersome. It's not horrible or anything, but I'll do this one like that so you can see and make your own decisions. If you are going to do that though, you're going to want to trim those edges a little bit. But you want to trim just barely past those stitching holes, and that's why I have that little red mark on there. You can be real careful. You can always take a little more, but if you take too much, there's nothing you can do about it. I just keep an eye on that mark. So I only go just barely past those stitches. That way you can see them while you're sewing that turned in edge. Otherwise it's crazy hard, but being able to see them like that makes it doable for sure. And I'll go all the way down, make sure you're doing the short sides, all the way down on this one and all the way down on that one. Again, be careful if you're pulling this back and the leather's popping up, you can dig into it and start cutting it. You're going to want to be careful, especially if this is the side you tied the knot on for that. You can come in with a pair of scissors just to be real extra careful. Feel for that knot. If you feel it, make sure you're not hitting it with this and you could cut that thread. With those two parts ready, you can sew the long end or the short side first. Short side, this one's going to be the turned in edge. I'm just going to sew the long end first. The only difference is if you do the long end first, you'll have to sew the short side flipped out and then just reverse it after you're done. So I'll show you that. But since this is a longer seam, I'm not going to do that full 8 times length to go double whip back and then be able to just saddle stitch on the way back. I'll do the double whip and then tie a knot and then cut another piece of thread to do the saddle stitch back. That way I'm not dealing with a ridiculous amount of thread. It's still going to be kind of long, but definitely manageable. Same thing as before. This one will have tick marks, so if you're sewing on a machine, those are real helpful. And even if you're sewing by hand, it makes it a little easier to line up holes because then you can just put those tick marks together and start clipping it. When it comes to curved parts like this, I tend not to clip the whole distance. I'll go back maybe halfway because that's not too much of a curve. That way you're not fighting it and it's not trying to move out of shape too much on you. Make sure the edges of those aren't getting tucked in with the sheep fur pulling it down too much. Kind of tug them up, or you can even use a needle if you need to kind of pry them up a little bit. You just don't want that fur popping out. So tick marks are definitely helpful because there's going to be a little bit of easing in this. And by that I mean the parts will seem like they don't go together or line up completely perfect. It's because whenever you're dealing with some curved edges, things won't seem to just butt up perfectly together. Like right now, if I just started clipping, those would be off a little bit, and it seems like that's got a little slack on it. But looking at the holes or use these tick marks can be helpful to get that right. Then once you start lining it up and it wants to take that shape, they'll kind of line up a little bit better here. That's probably good. I'll start sewing. Same thing as before. This time it will just be the double whip stitch. A little bit more thread to deal with here. Make sure we get both ends the same length. Going over the straight over the top and then straight around the back of the seam. Exact same thing as before. Go down a little bit, catch that other needle up with the double whip over the top, and once you get down to here, throw some more clips on there. Anytime I stop for a minute, throw a clip on there. So when you get to these seams, you can really do it any way you want. But I like to do it a specific way. I'll show you here because I think it looks a little better. Really personal preference. Since that seam is lined directly up with this hole, this is going to go across like that. If I was to come up, so I treat these two sides just as a singular hole, so I just pick which side I'm coming up on. If I was to come up on this side, then the next hole is over here, so it's going to like wrap around that seam and pull it. So what I like to do, since it's coming right here, I'll go to this other side right there. So it's not fighting to pull from that other side. It just falls right in between there. So if I do a couple more, I'll come up with that other one and show you how it finishes up. So now I'm up to that same spot and it will cross over. So I'm going to be going down this hole and out this one. So it puts that cross over the stitch there, right on each side of that seam, holds it nicely, and now that will just fall on the other side of this one. And you're not, because we went through the hole on this seam on that side, we're not going through the hole on this seam on that side. That's one of the different things about the coat versus some of my other patterns. That is considered a single hole, both of those, you know, that one on each side there. So we're coming across, but going not to that one, to this next one, and out right there. And it holds that right in between those two crossovers. Makes it look a little nicer. You can do it however you want. That's just the way I do it. I got to the top here, into this, and I went over the top, around the outside, and then I just back stitched one and came through the back again, like we did before. So like I said, we're just doing the double whip and then tying a knot, because it would have been just so long if we were to do all of it at once. So I'll tie a knot and then grab another piece that's 3 times the length and go back and do that saddle stitch. So let's go through, tie a knot like we did before. I like to throw a clip on there just to hold those tight. Just open that up, tie a knot. This one's got a lot of stuff in the way, a little more difficult for some reason. So once I get it opened up enough, I'll make sure to throw some clips on there. Trying to help hold everything out of the way while I'm tying these knots. Just the tiniest little dab. Knots might be enough on their own, but I'd rather be safe. Okay, and I'll cut those real short. I'll leave just a little bit, so I don't want it cut right next to the knot. Now I'll grab another piece and go back and do the saddle stitching. Okay. Now since I back stitched one, I actually just start right after that with the saddle stitching. I'll mention too that anytime I'm doing the saddle stitching, I'll be at the bottom of the hole because all that double whip is pulled to the top of the hole. I just want to be underneath that. I don't want to try to force up above it. Just stay underneath it so it looks really uniform going across. And the most important part is when you're doing those turned in seams, you want to make sure you're underneath that double whip, because then if that seam starts to show, or the stitches I should say, if any stitches show, you're only going to see that saddle stitch. You're not going to see any of that double whip being pulled down if you do the double whip, since it won't be seen. It's not crucial. I do that because it's just a little bit more durable. But we'll talk about that when we get to that scene. And like any other thing you're doing, always come through the same way first. Pull the thread to the same side every time and go to the same side when you're coming back through. Makes the stitches look a little better. Pulling it so it just bunches up a little bit, and then them stitches will set in real nice when it stretches back out. Pretty easy, but when you get to the other seam there, we'll go in this hole on that side and pop out right here. And then when we do this needle, we just pop out on the other side of that seam on that hole. Right here. This one has the fur shaved off, so it'll be a little bit easier to tie that knot. Won't have to fight the fur. So with the short seam here, you can do it the same, but I'm turning this seam in so you can see I already went and shaved it just barely past those stitching holes. And I'm actually going to do the same before I sew that together. I'll do the same to this seam, since that one is also turned in. That's the top seam across the whole top here. That's where the sleeve will attach to the jacket. Like I said before, I have that mark on there. So I can start and go short and then find those holes and just barely go past it, and then remember where that mark is. Again, be real careful. If you're pulling up, you could cut into the skin. You can do this with scissors if you want. It'll take you a little bit longer probably, but looks pretty good. That's like right on the hole. I like it just barely past it. Like that. That way you can see the holes while you're sewing it. So I'll finish that up, and again it's just from this corner to this corner. That's where it attaches to the coat itself. These two short edges are already done. Okay, so since we did that seam first, when we do this seam, after we're done, we'll just flip the arm back right side out. But I'll grab, and you can take a look at those tick marks and just line it up. Because of the shape of the arm, it's not going to naturally want to just line right up. The two parts are a little different. So you can go a little ways at a time, throw a clip on there just to kind of hold it in that shape off the bat. That'll make it easier to sew. You won't be fighting it as much. Like I said, this seam is a little bit more cumbersome to sew. Can be done. I do it because I like how it looks. But you can do the entire coat by sewing all the seams out. That is just fine also. Around the top and around the side, the outside. So first we're doing that double whip stitch, and when we come back across with that saddle stitch, we make sure we're underneath those other stitches. We don't want to go up on top of the hole where those are, but we'll talk about that when we get to that point. So just, and you can skip the double whip stitch here, but like I show in that quick little video on sewing, you're gonna see a difference. It's gonna show a little bit more stitches. If you do this double whip and then the saddle, the stitches are gonna be tighter and you're not gonna see that seam as much. So we'll just throw that on there to hold it. And if you can't see, your fingers are already holding that back, you can open it up to look in there to see where that hole is, but usually it finds it pretty easily. As long as you're holding that fur out of the way, you're going to be fine. And once you get a couple stitches, you can use that to kind of pull it into your fingers. And now you can see why you really want to shave that just past those holes. Otherwise, you're going to be grabbing that fur as you're pulling these through. If you see it start to grab, make sure you stop, and you can even pull it back a little. Get that out of there. So like you can tell how far back. Let me stop for a sec. You can tell how far back I went, maybe a couple millimeters back behind those stitches when I shaved that fur off. Just enough so it won't be grabbing it as I'm coming through. I got the single whip all the way to the end, over the top, over the side. And I'll say too, what I like to do is put this off the edge of the table so I can easily just get to it from underneath, and it helps to put like a weight, like something, helps to put a weight or something on there. You can even turn the seam just a little so it twists up towards you. But having this just off the edge of a table is helpful too. And the second stitch for that double whip, I just look at that thread and kind of follow it down. It's more likely to pull stuff from underneath, so just keep one of your fingers right under that. You notice again, anytime I stop, I throw a clip on the end, or if I stop here, throw a clip on there. I'll get to the end, we'll tie a knot, and I'll go back and do that saddle stitch. Really helps having that weight on here. All right, I'll get to the end with this stitch, and we'll start that saddle stitch across the seam. While doing this stitch, it's a little easier to miss one with the wool and everything in the way. What I like to do is when I pull this, take a look at where that next hole is and just make sure I'm hitting that instead of skipping ahead on accident. Yeah, I just started. Can you give me 30 seconds? Okay, I got the double whip completely done here. I like this too. You just tie a knot on top, the inside of the seam, because this is going to be folded over and sewn for that cuff. Now we just need to, you can stretch it just a little bit if it's bunching up, which just gets the, I usually wait and do that after I do the saddle stitching. Now we'll just saddle stitch this all the way down. Doing the same thing, making sure you don't get any wool pulled down in there. So while you're doing this, it's crucial that you stay at the bottom of the hole, which is easy. I just don't want you to try to force this up above those other stitches, because you want the only stitch that shows to be this saddle stitch. If you try to force up above there, it's going to look real sloppy if that seam opens up at all. So those are already pulled to the top of the hole. It's easy just to keep this thread needle to the bottom. Just the standard saddle stitch now. Looks like a little bit might have got pulled in there. Yeah, a little bit got pulled in there from when I was doing the double whip. So I'll just try to get that out of there. And if you're real careful from the other side too, once you flip this back, you should be able to pull some of that out. But give me a hard time. First couple can be difficult here. And then, like anytime you're doing a saddle stitch, you want to make sure you're pulling it to the same side every time, and that second needle always goes through from the same side every time, just to keep those stitches as uniformly looking as possible. So I'm always coming up from underneath. First, and I'm keeping that thread pulled towards me when I drop that secondary needle back through. Let's see, once I get going, it ain't so bad. And we'll just do that saddle stitch all the way down, and like before too, you're going to want to pull and get it to bunch just the littlest bit. That way they're going to be nice and tight when this stretches out and the stitches set in. If you go too loose, you're just going to see those stitches more. It can seem kind of tricky as you're doing this, but you'll figure it out. It can seem a little tricky to try to do this. You'll figure out a method that works best for you, I'm sure, but I usually just grab both of these so I can get the wool out of the way like that. And then after I come through, so it can seem like it's a bit tricky. I'm sure you'll figure out a way that works good for you. But I'll tighten it so I get that little bit of bunching, then grab both those threads again while keeping that other bottom one in my hand so I can go right back to the next stitch. Hold that with the other two fingers. Come through. Tighten it. Grab both of them. And then I already have this in my hand so I can go right ahead to the next stitch. Once you do it a little bit, you'll figure something out that works good. Saddle stitching's done. You can just kind of set those stitches in a little bit, but just be gentle. So now we're going to need to flip this back right side out. You want to start at the narrow side. And just be gentle, don't try to force anything. Just take your time. And like I said, you wouldn't have to do this if you did the short side first. It could be tempting just to force this last bit through, but be gentle. Especially once this coat's done, you're going to want to be gentle with it for quite some time, just to really let it get used to the stretches and let the stitches set in, so you're not forcing it to overly stretch in any given spot. Looks pretty good. Those stitches are nice and hidden. Last thing we're going to do for this arm is the cuff on the end here. And if you didn't shave half of that fur off, you're going to want to do that now or before you flip it back through. Fold this right in half. And to know where that fold is, I like to just stick a needle through here and then make it straight. If anything, back towards me just a little, because that inside's going to want to come back out. And then I'll go around the whole thing and just put some clips on here, so we're not fighting that fold the whole time we're trying to sew this. And just get it centered from back and forth and forward and back. If you're not sure if you're hitting the right hole across there, you can just start on the seam and count like 8 holes out or whatever, so you know for sure. So if you're not sure you're hitting the right holes with that needle, you can count from a seam out and then just keep working your way around. And that just helps hold it so you're not fighting it the whole time. You can pretty much start anywhere, and this is just a saddle stitch, so 3 times the length should be good. And I will start right on the seam itself. You can start wherever you want, but when you get to the seam, make sure you are going right through that seam. So as you're going, it may not want to stay turned how you like it, so throw a little weight in there. Keep the part you're sewing going straight up. So I always come from the inside first. That way if anything gets pulled through, we'll push it back down when we go back from the top side here. But also if you pull straight up from the hole, so it's just kind of loose and comes up real easy, you're less likely to pull any of that wool through the hole. hardest part's finding that hole right there when you're coming through. Snug, little bit of bunching. So like this, I just pull straight, nice and loose. So when I come up, just loose, straight, I'm not pulling it towards me. Just straight up from the hole. Usually doesn't grab much, if anything, but it can happen, and I found that just works a little bit better. Again, just instead of pulling it just coming at me, I'll throw my thumb or something there and just gently pull it through. Same as when we're doing those other seams when you come across them. Since I'm getting to this, I don't want to go over the top of that again, so I just make sure I come to this side. And then this one's going down. Since this hole on this side and that same hole on this side, we consider those one hole for this jacket. I'll just go down on that one, and same thing on the inside of that. Come through right there. Keeps that seam looking nice and natural. We're not trying to force it to go down with this stitch line. One thing that's easy to do is when you're coming back through, just to go through and feel like you hit the hole, but almost every time doing that, you're just going to miss it out and come out the backside. That's why you'll see me almost every time take a look, make sure I'm hitting that correct hole. So I got all the way around. This last stitch, I'm not going to come up from the back. I'm just going to go right through right here. And then what I'll do is go down that back hole and come from underneath. So then it's just got that singular line of stitches. Then I'll go with this thread to that next hole and pop out in between those two, so that knot will tuck up back behind there. But I will do a second stitch with this other needle to come out right there, so it's right next to the seam. Tying the knot right on the seam doesn't always work as great. And again, to make sure, I always go once through, twice through, because then you make that knot and it'll stay tight under there. And you can check your stitches, tighten them up if you need to a little. And I'll start that second one before I put a little glue on there. Just the littlest dab. Almost got glue on the skin. If you don't want those poking out, because I like to leave just a little bit of slack on a knot. I'll go through right where that knot is, and then just kind of backtrack a little. Here, let me go this other way. I'll grab one of those threads, go through right where that knot is to try to pull the knot through that stitch, but I'm going in between the two layers back a little bit so I can just pop out one of these random holes here, like that. Same thing with this one. Through underneath that same stitch so that knot gets pulled right through there. Back a little bit, and you don't have to go through that same hole because we're going to cut this. Pop out, then pull. Careful not to pull too hard, you don't want to open that hole up. But you're getting that knot pulled in there. Yeah. And then with just a little bit of tension, those will pop back in there. So that knot's pulled in there and you got some slack, and it's not going to hit your arm and make it like scratch or whatever. And that will settle down with time, flatten out a little bit. You can't even, well, first let me set those stitches just a little bit. Be careful, it's easy to overstretch this one because you can really get a good grip. Give it some taps. And that little seam allowance, you can let that come forward. Don't wail on that seam, or any seam for that matter, too hard. You could tear stitches. Like I said, that will flatten out a little more over time, but looks pretty good as is. That's one sleeve. Do that exact same process for the other sleeve. It would just be mirrored image. What I like to do is one whole side of the coat and then just the mirrored side of the other side. So we'll do all the left side first and then we'll do the right side. And then we can just sew those two halves together, and then there's only two pieces that will span across both. It's across the back and the collar itself. Kind of breaks it down a little bit. You're going to start with the side left. This is right underneath the arm. Not the arm itself, but underneath. And then the side left bottom. And if you get your parts mixed up, you can check for the holes for the pocket if you just want to make sure. I'm going to do these two parts first, sewn across this edge, and that's it. And since it's a little bit shorter, I do go with 8 times the length so I can just double whip and then saddle back. And I don't have to stop and do a separate thread, however you want to do it. Let's clip these together and get going here. Just another reminder, always do the whip stitches first. That'll open the hole up so those saddle stitches can go across underneath, be uniform. So I went down with the double whip. Now I'm heading back with a saddle stitch. And since in the beginning of the video we went over every little detail, and I do suggest doing an easier pattern first, I won't be talking about every single step, tying knots, all that stuff with every part. That'd be quite cumbersome. So we'll skip over a lot of that. I do suggest putting the parts together like I am. If you do it in a different order and you do each side individually and then put them together, make sure you do the exact same order on the opposite mirrored side, so that when like different seams, especially 4 seams, come together, they'll look exactly the same. If you do it different, it will give you slightly different results when you put all the different seams together. So I thought I'd mention that. We have those 2 sewn together, and then I'm going to set those aside and sew these 2 together, which is the back left bottom and the back left middle. And those 2 go together right here, just on that seam. After we do that, we'll put these 4 together. For the time being, it's just these 2. Okay, that piece is done. This is the one from before. They're actually going to go like this. So I'll grab, this is what we just did, back left middle, back left bottom, and this is side left bottom. So they're going to go like this. That curved part is going to go against that side. And since it's got that curve and a little bit of easing it together, there are going to be tick marks on the pattern. I'll have to go back and mark it on this one. I usually start on the top and try to line the edges up. I'll let that point come past that edge like that just a little bit, but you don't want it too off. Try to keep it pretty close. It's a good time to have those marks on both parts, but I'm just going to watch those holes as I clip this. They're going to be off just a little because of that edge, but what we can do is start here too and clip that up and get everything lined up. I'll usually just clip half of it. I don't clip the whole length. I'll get down close to that and then throw some more clips on there. You can see the holes. As it gets to the top, the angle of the hole changes a little to align with the edge of that. So as you're sewing, just kind of keep that in mind. Once over the top, once over the side. As you come around the corner, those holes will go more straight across that seam. It won't seem like an angle as much. Nope, I actually missed a hole there. So if you miss a hole, just going back through isn't going to do it because it's going to grab and go around a bunch of the fur. You're going to have to pop the needle off and pull this back through. Otherwise, you're just going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. So you can do one complete side of the coat and then the other, or every time you do one of these steps, just mirror it over and do both sides at the same time. Whichever way you want to do it works just fine. I like to do one whole side first and then go do the other side. Makes it a little easier for me just to keep the parts separate and whatnot, but you know, personal preference. When you get to that point where those seams are coming together, we're treating, as before, the hole on each side of that seam where it was sewn together. We're considering that one hole. So if I go in on this side, I'm going to pop out on the opposite side of that seam. That way it's not fighting to get over that and continue on. It will more naturally follow that angle. Be helpful to just kind of pinch that up where it wants to be. And the same goes for that secondary stitch. We come on that side. We're going to pop up the other side. So I'm just finishing up the double whip stitch. I want to point out the other reason I like to start on this end is because the bottom has that fold that we're going to do when the coat's almost done. So we don't have to try to tie that knot behind the wool or anything. I'll just come through one of these stitches to the other side and just tie it right here. And then when we fold that over and sew it, it'll be completely hidden. Makes it quite a bit easier. I'll still put a little dab of glue on it though. And then I'll start that saddle stitch from this end as well, and then we'll tie a little knot. So when I have 4 seams coming together like this, I do it a little bit different. The arms, I go underneath like I showed because then it just kind of butts up. Looks cleaner, it pokes out a little bit, it looks more refined. With these, I like to use the strength of those seams and help kind of pull them down a little, so I do it a little different. And here's how that goes. So instead of going through, actually this is the first needle. Instead of going through and across, I will go in and just out that same side. And this is one of the only times I'm going to treat each side of that as a separate hole. So I go through like that, and we're going to go over the top of it because it just holds everything together better, makes that stronger because it's using more of the strength of that seam. And then I pop and stay on that same side again. But instead of going to the next hole, I go just over the top of that through the other side and out. Because now that's going to go over the top of that seam and pull those two together using the strength of that whole seam. It just a little bit stronger, looks a little cleaner when you have 4 of these coming together. Not a huge deal. This is the way I do it. Just have that go right over the top of that other stitch. And then you'll see it just pulls that together better. So then it's really using that. but that's only for when we have 4 seams coming together. And then I continue on to the next hole. I like to stretch that a little, lock those stitches in. You can see how tight that corner gets, really holds together. I'll usually straighten that seam out a little too. So the next parts are going to be on this side, but that's actually the front, so this piece will be going here, this piece will be going down here. So for now, let's just get rid of this and not even worry about that for the time being. And we're going to look at these 3 pieces. It's going to be the front left middle, front left bottom, and then this would be the front left top. So it's going to be those 3 pieces, and then those will attach to those other ones we were sewing. But before we do that, I like to sew those reinforcements for the buttons on first. A little bit easier. You can wait till the coat's done, really personal preference. So here's one that's completed. And we're going to do this one, and it's going to go on the back like that. You're going to want to make these holes on those white dots, because I don't like them being as big as that 1 millimeter. That's a little bit too big. You could maybe use something smaller if you have it. I prefer to just use a stitching awl. The only thing is, when you make that hole, make sure you're pressing it down through there a little bit more. Otherwise that hole won't be opened up enough, and it's going to be real hard to sew these with your needles going through there. So we actually go through it 3 times or so. But make all your holes, making sure to press through so it gets to a thicker part of that awl. And we'll do all of these. I grabbed 4 times the length to go around the outside part. Just helps. It's such a small piece with a short distance that if you go 3 times the length, you're going to be fighting it at the end a little bit. But I like to start on a corner, because then I know I'm starting on the same hole on both. And I'll start somewhere on one of these 2 corners, because this will be folded eventually. And that's going to make it real easy for us to go around and just tie a little knot. It'll get hidden. Let's just start on this corner. Try to go straight up. If you go and you're looking for the hole doing this, you're going to grab that wool and it's going to be kind of weird. So come from underneath and kind of poke up and find the spot. As long as you're pretty close, you'll be good. First couple stitches can be a little difficult, but once you get going, it's pretty easy. Make sure you pull it tight with every stitch. As you go and take a peek, make sure you're not grabbing a bunch of wool underneath that stitch. While you're messing with it, the first stitch or 2 back are going to loosen up on you. But as long as you snug that up good with every stitch, it will tighten up back far enough and just hold those down. I'm pulling until I feel that tension of the padding hit. Basically, pull until I feel it when it gets real tight. I don't want to bunch this up too much, but you do want it tight. So you can just tie the knot up top because this will fold over and be sewn down and be hidden. But I usually will just go through back down that same line and tie it underneath here, right in between that layer. Leave just a little bit, and you can grab a needle or a small modeling spoon, works good. Just stuff that excess in between two stitches. Usually when we're doing seams, we do the double whip stitch first, but when it comes to this internal seam here, I like to do the saddle stitch first, and then we'll do the double whip stitch, which goes over the top, and I'll show you how I do that. I find it just a little bit stronger. I like how it ends up looking too. So as long as you push that stitching all through far enough to open those holes just enough, you should be fine. Otherwise, while you're sewing this, you can grab that stitching all and open those holes up a little bit more as you're going, because you don't want to fight it too much. That can kind of be a pain. So we're just starting with the saddle stitch first. As always, to the same side every time. The real only trick is not to go right through the previous thread. And sometimes it helps to hold a little tension on that. When I get to the last stitch, I'll go over that first one again and come up between the layers. And actually go through this one completely first. And then go through that same hole so I can come out on the same side. Make sure you barely put any glue on that knot. If you're worried about it, just skip out on the glue. Leave a little slack, and then you can stuff them in there. So before I go over the top, basically like a double whip stitch around that whole edge, I want to trim some of that wool. It's pretty thick right there. Just be real careful not to cut into the skin on either side. So take your time. Basically just cutting it straight across. You don't want to cut into that seam. So I'll have my scissors at an angle. I don't want to cut that other side because I can't really see it. I'd rather take my time. And that's getting there. Once I can see both sides, I like to kind of make it flush with the two edges. A little messy. So it would be a good idea maybe to do this on a separate part of the table or a different area or something. Flatten that back out a little bit if you wrenched it out of shape. Alright, so now we're doing that whip stitch. I already went through one hole, just even these up. This is going to be a little different. We're just going to start with one needle, just come right through the center. And we'll pick a direction to go either way. I'll go this way first. The thing with this, since we did that saddle stitch first, and I find it looks a little nicer, you can see on that one, is I'm trying to fall on this side, the outside of that saddle stitch, so it grabs them and pulls them. So I just kind of get to that hole, press out a little, just to make sure I'm falling on the outside of those stitches. And when I come up from the back side, I try not to just split those stitches in the middle. Not crucial to do it that way, but it will come out looking a little bit cleaner. Come right through the center again. If you come at an angle and press a little, it's not too hard to get it on the outside of those stitches. But like I said, you don't have to do it this way. I like to. Looks a little bit cleaner. And then make sure they look nice and straight and evenly spaced on the front, good and tight. I like to kind of pinch those two seams together so they stay flatter. You can kind of see how it gets behind that saddle stitch and it looks nice and clean if you focus on doing it that same way every stitch. So if you just kind of haphazardly go through, it could fall on either side with each stitch. A little more sloppy, not a big deal. This is one of the steps where I just kind of take my time and try to make it look as nice as I can. Got to the last hole. For the time being, I'll just pop up through the back and let that be right there. And we'll just do that same thing coming the other way. So I'm going the same way around, but this time I'm coming up from the back side. And maybe I should have done it the opposite, because then you're coming from the front side the second time around. But I just happen to do it this way. And then we'll get that nice double whip stitch look. Just go all the way around and we'll get here and then we'll tie a knot. But yes, I would suggest doing it the other way around. Do this stitch first coming from the back side and then do the one coming from the front side. Really doesn't matter too much because we had that saddle stitch prior, so you got to be real careful anyways. So like right here, I could just force it through and then I make a new hole. So I just got to make sure I'm hitting that previous hole. So take your time, be careful with these stitches. Looks good. I'll go all the way around and I'll show you how I tie a knot. So when I get to the end, and you can do it however you'd wish, I'll go through this last stitch. This is the last one that has to come through that center. But instead of going all the way back through, all the stitches are done. I'll pick one of the sides of one of the stitches up here. So I'll come through, but then pop up in between. So I'm going in between that stitch with that thread. And I'll actually just go back up that hole that came through and go one stitch over. So where that stitch goes through the layers, I can tie a knot and it'll pull it up against that and I can hide the knot. Like I said, you can back stitch, do however you want, a couple back stitches just to hold stuff in place. This is just how I've been doing it. I don't pull it too tight, that's a little tight, so I'll just... so it doesn't bunch that up right there. So with the 3 buttonholes done on these parts, we're going to have to sew these 3 together just like that. So we have the front left top, front left middle, front left bottom, and we'll do the front left top and front left middle first along this seam. And that's just from here to here. And I like to start, since this is folding over especially, those knots can just be tied and hidden in there. Plus these sides where it's at like a sharp angle, instead of trying to line these holes up straight across that seam, you're going to get that going over a little bit. We want it to be at a little bit of an angle. If it goes over a little bit is alright. But that way we can clip these and get them a little closer to where we want them. And look at that corner to this corner, those 2 holes, and the next, so those ones will be going straight across. That way I can clip that and ease these 2 back together so they'll be off a little bit at an angle and then they'll slowly come back together to that corner. Okay, front left top, front left middle are done. So this front left middle is going to now be sewn to the front left bottom, just across this seam. A lot easier to tie a knot there, so that'll be fold over, be hidden. Okay, so that is those three parts. We're going to grab that other section and sew it to the edge here. Alright, I got a bunch of stuff sitting here. This was what we had done before. This is what we just finished with those buttonholes. So we got front left top, front left middle, front left bottom. Get rid of those. And this is what we did beforehand. Side left, back left, middle. And what we're going to do is take these two pieces and put them together. Get rid of those. Because this right here is going to be creating the armhole. So these two pieces will be going together right here. And it'll be a little easier to see because all the holes for the pocket will go across these two parts. We're just going to sew this seam from the top of that right here down to that edge, from here to here. And same as before, I'll put some clips on here and start right here. So that tip will go past just a little bit, but we don't want those holes directly straight across from each other. It'll be a little bit of an angle so that we can ease that in. By the time it gets to that seam, the holes should be straight across again. Here's what I do if I come across my tick marks or something. If you just very gently hit it with the tip of the needle, a little bit of a scratch with your fingernail gets rid of almost all of that. Those are those new pens that I'm using. Talk about it in the beginning of the video. I figured I'd just cover going over these double seams again, since it is kind of unique and I only did it that one time before. So when we got that last hole, instead of going straight across, I'm going to go in and kitty corner out this other side. That's for the whip stitch. Once we get through with the double whip, I'll do something a little different with that saddle stitch. That just helps strengthen that quadruple seam. And then we just continue on from there, almost as if that seam isn't even there. Okay, now I'm up to that point, the other needle, and do that same thing. Kitty corner across. Yeah. And just continue on. Go ahead and finish that, and then I'll come back and when I get here and show how to cross it with that saddle stitch. So before I went across kitty corner with this saddle stitch, we're going to come straight across. That way the stitch actually goes over that seam and it'll pull it down and really tighten those two together, giving that strength across there, across that seam real nice. And just hop right over the other side of that seam instead of going to the next hole. just go across the seam. We'll just line that up with that other top stitch. Pulls those together nice. Really makes that strong across there. Let's get to the end here and we'll tie a knot. That seam is done. So that is that other half. You can mirror this over and do the other side of the coat. Next we're going to be doing the pocket for this part. And this is just like a cuff where we're going to have to shave halfway back for that fold. I always like to give it just a little start. Making sure not to nick the skin. Then I already know where I go to on this, but I like to set that on there, check that halfway mark, and know where that edge is going to be on my shaver. So as I'm doing this, I can just keep an eye on where that goes to that edge. I like to give it a fold and put some clips on it first, just to hold it like where it needs to be. I'll put the needle through, just make sure it's straight across. And if anything, I like to just tip it a little down to make sure that comes around underneath there nice. But just throw some clips. I'm going to make sure to get the stitches snug, but not overly bunching, just a tiny bit. They will set in real nice. And try not to go through the thread from the previous stitch like I almost did there. And you'll feel that padding compress when you pull the stitches, and just try not to pull too much past that. So when I get to that last hole, I'll just go through right here. And that will be hidden with the seam coming right around. So I'll just tie that knot right there. And that will flatten out and over time compress and look real nice. Set those stitches in a little bit, just a little bit of a stretch. This is the side we completed earlier. Okay, before you start sewing this pocket onto the coat, make sure you're grabbing this reinforcement piece. As you can see, I started doing the video and I forgot to put that on there. So I had to strip a few stitches, not a huge deal. But this will go underneath just like that. So that side shows, like so. So these first 6, 7, 8, whatever stitches coming around here are going to be a little more difficult. Just take your time. Once you get past that, it gets easy. So I will start on that corner right here, which would be this corner from underneath. And I'm going to hold it pretty high on the needle and try to come straight up underneath that hole. If I need to back out to find it, I will. And I can feel, there we go. And then grab that. This likes to move around a lot, so you can throw a weight on here as you're doing a couple stitches. And what I do is, as I'm pulling this thread through, I'm holding my fingers like this underneath so that it comes straight up and doesn't grab a bunch of that fur and pull it into the hole or just make it be kind of weird, come in all funny. So I'll get about halfway, then I'll check and make sure this length is the same on both of these. Then I'll just grab the needle on this end that would be from underneath again. And the next hole up would be this hole right here. And again, I'm still going to kind of feel these first few stitches are a little more cumbersome, but take your time. And we're coming up that hole. Hold my fingers underneath to make sure that goes straight up. And as you're going, you could feel a knot start to form. Stop and make sure you undo that. It's a lot easier than trying to undo a knot that gets all tight. Usually the fur doesn't get pulled up through the hole like that, but as we come down with the second stitch, that's one of the reasons we always come up first and then back down to finish it, is because that'll pull that back through there. A little bit of tension on the thread so you're not going through the thread itself. And if the first couple stitches are easier to just come through and then hit this next one, that's totally fine. And then we'll check and make sure we're hitting this. It's real easy to do that and to pop up for all these stitches. It's easy to pop up outside of that hole. Back it up, make sure you're not hitting that thread. And I'll do the same thing. Hold my fingers underneath so it pulls straight through. It might grab a little of that stuff from the side. Before you tighten the stitch, get that out of there. Once we get past this little corner and reinforcement piece and everything, we're not going to have to flip it over and check every hole and do all this. But that reinforcement piece is important. A lot of sheepskin's coats don't have that, and I've repaired quite a few in my day. So wherever on this coat we're doing, wherever I feel like it needs to be stronger, that's what we're doing. I'd rather make a higher quality product, or have you be making a higher quality product, than have issues down the road. Make sure we're going straight in. Making sure to hold my fingers underneath there, directing that thread. This will be the last stitch through that reinforcement piece and all these layers. So a couple more ahead and it's going to get a lot easier. Okay, you'll notice that stitch coming across right here isn't there yet, which is these ones. But when we do this outside stitch, we'll hit those and come around because we're going to double stitch that full square. So we'll just start there next time we come through with that other stitch line. So now that we did all the stitches around on that piece there, we don't have to lift it up and check anymore. Just hold your needle, lift this up, and make sure we're coming up that next hole right next to the one with the other two stitches going through it. And then pop this over. Still holding that thread. So I'll go straight in, hold a little tension on that other thread, take a peek here, and make sure we're going through that hole where that other thread is coming out. We don't want to skip ahead. What I like to do too is I'll get about halfway, count how many holes are left on there and there, make sure I didn't miss a stitch. What I'll do too here is I'll zoom that camera in and walk through the whole process again, just so it's really dialed in. Okay. So again, I'm holding my finger on there so I can try to come straight up and back out and find this hole underneath here. And I'm peeking, trying not to pull this up too far to loosen those stitches. Peeking to make sure I'm coming to that next hole from where those other threads are coming out. Find that hole, leave that needle through just enough, lay this down, and then find this next one. And I'm pinching that thread in between my two fingers underneath, just like this. So as it's pulling, it pulls it straight up instead of grabbing, and it could rub and grab and pull some of this fur. Pulling the thread to the same way every single time. Little bit of tension on that thread, otherwise you have a good chance of going through it, which could tear some of the fibers even. Go straight down, lift this up, and make sure I'm going down that hole the other thread's coming out of. Get it started and go straight down. And then again, I'm putting my fingers right here so as the thread is pulled, it's actually pulled straight through. Tighten it up good. So when I get to that seam, we treat like the hole on that side of the seam and the hole on that side of the seam as a singular hole. So when I come up on that seam, I'll come up on this side. So on that side, come through that. But when I go back down with this needle, I'll go back down on that other side. So I'll just come all the way through to make it easier on myself. And then I'll drop onto this side. All right. So one hole away from that seam, which is those holes around that reinforcement that will be up behind there. So what I'll do is this is going to be behind there exactly like that. This thread that's underneath is going to come up through that hole, which is that hole right on that seam. Right there. Tuck that down. And just follow that back through. A little hard to see. That one. But we're going to have to start turning this back over again to make sure we start hitting these. If it's giving you problems, you can just come through and just do that in a second swipe. It'll be just like that. We're going to go up to the next one. To that hole. And we're coming across the top. That's not this one. Let's go through both layers with this stitch here. As you can see, that's right between those two layers. This one, we're just going to back stitch one stitch to back here and pop out between that same layer. And then we'll tie a knot right there, little dab of glue. Check and see if they're tight enough. And you can tuck those back in there, those ends if you want. Alright, so we're going to do that second row of stitches closer to the edge. And I do like to have double stitching around that box. You don't have to. I like to do it. I think it might reinforce it a little bit better. We're going to start in that corner, go around so that gets double stitching all around, and then come down. It's easier to start from the front. It's a little harder to find the hole going through from the back. But you are going to want to look every time to make sure you're going through the correct hole in that reinforcement piece on the back. You can start by poking the needle from the top. Chances are it'll go through a lot easier. But you are going to still want to take a look and make sure it's getting to that correct hole before you flip this back over. And I'll place this needle with that point right on my finger so I can feel the other needle from underneath, and I'll place it right on there, follow that up to the leather, and then when I pull that other one through, it'll follow right through that hole. So I'll do that. And I know that's already going through all those layers nicely. Follows up a little bit better. So whenever we fall back down through, gotta check while we're doing this reinforcement piece. It's almost always going to miss it and go out the outside. Just check and make sure it's getting through that. You might be able to just come from back here and get through like that, but I was just showing you that other way just in case it's causing problems. A little difficult from the back side there. Pull that out of the way. Feels like it went through good, which it actually did hit the right one. All right. A lot of times it won't. Once you get done with all these layers and the reinforcement piece and stuff, it'll get quite a bit easier. Now we're falling off of that part. We don't have to keep peeking underneath to make sure we're hitting all that. I can go back to feeling for the hole from underneath, but instead of being able to lift this all the way up, I just kind of push that out a little ways so I can see that hole, and then fold that down. It's actually right on the edge of that one. There it is. And back to really holding that thread so it's not grabbing fur. Feeling underneath, looking for that next hole. Keeping my fingers on that thread, directing it. A little bit of tension helps keep this from going through the previous thread. Might be able to just find it, but I do still like to take a peek, make sure I'm hitting the right one. Just do that all the way around. And if you go straight down, usually you can find that hole. You don't always have to look. But I will, once I get like halfway or close, count some holes, make sure you're not missing something. Or like I did before, take a peek and make sure you're hitting it. But if your stitches are lined up pretty well, you can just do this. So now I'm on that first stitch that will be going through this square and that reinforcement piece on the other side. So I'll start taking a peek and making sure I hit all the stitches right. So at this point, it's the same as the other side. We're going to go around, all the way around back to that point to make that full square. And we'll tie a little knot. You can bring the threads to the back or in between layers or whatever. Okay, we have this piece completely done. See those 3 pieces, and then the 2 and the 2 all sewn together for the pocket. I already went ahead and did the mirror image side, so it's the other side of the coat. It's an exact mirror image of this one, only these holes on the other side are going to just have the buttons themselves sewn to the coat and not have these big buttonholes on it. So let's just put this aside for a minute. We'll throw those buttons on the other side, and then we'll sew these 2 sides together. Okay, here's the other side. You can see exact mirror image of the one. And we have 3 spots. This one already has some holes cut out for it with some of the fur cut out. Same with this one. So we're going to go ahead and do this one together. And there's going to be a reinforcement piece on the back of that one too that you're going to want to grab. So we'll be gluing this piece underneath on the bottom to reinforce that section. A lot of sheepskin coats, pretty much all the ones I've seen, they try to have this be a dense piece, which I do have, and they just sew the button right to that with another little button behind it. I'd rather go even thicker because a couple of coats I've had to repair in the past have had buttons rip out. So why not just make it better now? With that said, we're going to glue it, so I don't want to punch those holes right away. Glue can seep through. I'm going to just do a little poke with this, and then we'll look on the back for these holes. I'll put my finger right on that spot. And I may even just, because I can feel where my finger is, just right where it is, clear that out a little bit. Keeping the scissors not very wide so I don't cut too much around it. So then you can see in there a little bit better. And if necessary, we can pull this from this side. Keep in mind what hole you're on. Feel where that's at. Once you get it open enough, we can mark those holes. I guess it would help if this pen worked, huh? I have a marker here, so I'll just dot that hole, that hole. See, I got those two top ones. Open those a little more so I can mark them. Somewhere in there. So we're gonna cut just enough first so it's just barely the size of that, if just the tiniest bit smaller. Try to get down close to the skin. You can always cut more if you need to, but if you cut too much, nothing you can do about it. Flip it around. If you just kind of work this out of the way, it will stay there. Don't use any real thin glue. It's still going to go through those holes. Be real careful. You can always kind of avoid those holes. Go around them a little. You don't want it to seep it in. And this is something you should probably do before you have this whole side sewn up, if you're unsure, or even just do a practice piece. And I'm going to use contact cement. I just have it in a jar here. You can always add a little more. Don't go heavy with this stuff. And I always will go away from the hole a little bit first, just in case there's a lot going on with that brush. Doesn't take a whole lot. If you go too heavy, like I said, you're going to seep it through. And let that dry. We're going to do the back of this as well. So the trick with this too now, let this completely dry, completely and utterly dry. If you have a little too much glue on there and you try to smush that down, you're going to just squeeze that glue right out of those holes onto the front. So I'm going to give that like 5 minutes at least. Make sure it's really good and dry, and I'll even check. If I touch that and it's tacky or gooey, that's still not dry enough. So we'll just get this on here. Press it down real good. And I always leave this side down so that that side is flat when I'm pressing this. I don't lift it up and press it because it could mush it a little weird. Alright, just let that completely dry now. And I like to do that just in case a little is on the fur, so it naturally wants to kind of be in. And then we'll put the buttons on, and I have 2 buttons here. And on the inside you can go as small as you want, really. Personal preference. On the outside, let's see, what do I have? They are 28 millimeter. And that's the max I would suggest for, I think this is extra large. But all the button sizes I recommend will be on each size of the pattern, so just go off of that. We'll let that dry and then we'll fasten those buttons on. Once that glue's completely dry, now we'll punch the holes. So you want the hole to be just a little bit bigger like the rest of these stitching holes. And what I like to do is take a look at where I poked through, and the edge that's going towards the center of that, we don't want to go right over the center of the holes. The holes could get a little close. So I'll go so that edge just butts up to that edge of the hole. And if you can still see that white on there, that works. And you can even grab the pattern and retrace those. But you're better off having these holes a little bit further apart than trying to put them super close together. So something like that. And now we're going through both layers. Makes it easier to get through a bunch of times. This one's for the front, this one's for the back. You can go a little smaller than that. I usually like to use a button that's about the size of that reinforcement piece, maybe a hair bigger. So then on the back, all you see is the other button there. Looks a little cleaner. Not a huge deal. And if it's concaved, I like to put that concaved part down, because then that extra material, knots and what have you, kind of sit in there a little more flush. Really doesn't matter. And we do have to put a spacer in here. I find a pencil is about the perfect distance. It'll keep that coat tight without being too tight when you button it all up. Make sure you grab a good long piece of thread so that you don't run out. And you're going to be wrapping it around quite a bit, going in and out here. And so I'll start by going through the back and just tying a knot. And I'll just go kitty corner across. You want to leave enough on the end of this and leave it there so that when we finish, we can tie a secondary knot to the other end. Almost all circumstances, I'll put a little dab of glue on there. So we'll start by coming up through one of the holes on this button and back down. But if we came up that hole, make sure you're going down the next hole so that they all will line up. Concave part of this button is going to be facing up. And see, I'm in that hole. Not that it matters, that first hole, you can just spin it around, but we're going to start, and you actually want to go a couple stitches first before you try to put that pencil in there. Get rid of this now. So that's that hole. We'll turn this so that looks the same, and then when we drop down that one, we'll go down that same hole. We don't want to mismatch and bounce around after we go through the button. And the same with this one. Take a look. That should be facing like this. So that is the right one. And we'll just snug it up for now, because it'll loosen back up when we need to put that pencil back in there. That would be this one, which is that one. I'm not as concerned with the button in the back, how many goes around, but when we're finished, I like 2 threads going through each one of these and over. You'll see as we go here. We'll go down that one, which would be this one. It's getting to a point where it'll start to stay snugged up when you snug it. So let's loosen it up a little and put a pencil underneath here. And I'll just hop over. Try to shoot for getting 1 thread over each one of those gaps to start with. That would be this one. Sometimes you gotta kind of push the pencil and stuff out of the way to get to that hole. And that would be that one. It's actually hitting it okay. I hold the button kind of straight across there when I'm snugging it up. Okay. So that would be the first stitch, going over each one of those. I want to do that all again, so we got the double. A little tricky. Sometimes you gotta kind of push it to the side to get it in there. Just try not to go through the other threads or grab a bunch of sheep's wool. Yeah, so right there, I can't go any way without getting 3 on one of those ones, but it'll set me up to get the 2 on each one of those ones. So in that case, I'm going to say whatever, as long as the front looks better. Alright, so I got my 2 threads going across each one of those. And I have still one here, so what I'll do is I'll just go through this one and come up, but don't go up through that hole, because then we're going to wrap it around everything. I'll just push that out of the way and pop up next to it. Now we're going to wrap this around there a few times. I like to take a look. Give that a squeeze. Try to get it down close to the skin and then up close to the button, as even as you can get it here, if you can see in there. Looks pretty good right like that. So before, I'm going to go back through and tie it to that other end. Before I do that, and go down real low. So I'm going to go around, hold it with my thumb, and then go through this loop to make that little kind of knot to hold it so it doesn't loosen up while I pop through the hole closest to that little knot. But we were wrapping this way, so I don't want to backtrack. I feel I'm hitting the button, so I'll come under, try to pull that button out of the way best I can. Be patient, this might take a second. It's coming. And then we can tie these 2 ends together, and that knot will tuck right underneath that button. Looks pretty good. I'll clip these just a hair past the end of the button, and we're done. Looks good from the inside. And then there's the button from the outside, and there's just enough space so when we put it on that other side, we're good. Just repeat that 2 more times for the one up there and the one right here. So a couple things as I was getting this last one on. So instead of starting with the back one, if you go through to the front and start with this front one, then you'll be able to get 2 stitches across every gap instead of that third. Not that you can really notice anyways. Thought I'd mention it. Also, what I like to do, this is my last stitch, and it gets harder. So to get to that hole, I'll put my middle finger on the button underneath, pointer on this one and my thumb on the pencil, so I can push both buttons this way while I'm pushing the pencil that way. Then it allows you to get to that hole a little bit easier. Thought I'd mention that little trick. Whether you want to use it or not, it's up to you. And same as before, I'm just going to finish that out and we'll move on. Okay, I moved over to my really big work table here just because this is so massive. So I had to reset all my lighting and my camera and everything up real high so we can see all this. This was the side that we had made in the beginning of the video, and from here over is just that mirror image of that side that you would have continued on and done, and then the buttons, all that. So we're going to sew those two pieces together just along this seam here that I have all the clips on. And the audio may be a little different, might be a little echoey, bouncing off the ceiling and such. The camera's a little further away, but you should get the gist of it. I did lay a blanket down so this coat isn't sitting on my scratched, dinged up work table. It's just sitting on this nice padded blanket. It helps kind of hold it. All right, got that seam sewn all the way down. Now we're going to put that top back piece on, which is this one. Goes this way, the back top. And this is one of the ones that's marked. This edge should be cut from some denser stuff. So both of these edges, I actually cut this one from like the center of the hide. Okay, so this seam, just from there to there, right where it's touching, from here to here, that's what we're gonna do. So I have this clipped on, and I'll mention again, same as these ones before, you want these edges to be close together. So the holes will actually be straight up and down going across that instead of straight across where the two come together. And you'll ease that back in as you come back to here. Same as before. So I'll sew that and we'll get on to the next step here. So you can do this 3-seam how we did the arms. I like to do this just a little bit different on the back since I like it to be just a little bit more sturdy. Doesn't matter. This needle, same as before, coming right out. Now this needle, instead of popping out this side going over, I'll go like I would on the arms and come out this way. But I'm going to do an extra loop over the top of that back seam so that locks it into that other seam there. Just really holds them together. I like to lay that right across the other stitch that goes across the top of that. Anytime I can make those seams just a little bit stronger, might as well. And then continue on just the standard saddle stitch. Okay, that part's sewn on. You can stretch it out a little bit, but don't go yanking on it. Now we're going to fold this over as if the jacket's kind of closing up for us now. And then we're moving on to these shoulder seams. So we got the top of the back of that one we just sewed. And this seam is sewing to that, and we'll get the other shoulder one sewn on as well. So let's open that up. I like to kind of pull it and see what that's given us is that armhole now. So it's these two seams just getting sewn together right here. So from this piece, it's from here to here, and then that front piece from there to there. I'll sew that up, and I'll sew the other one up. Both shoulders are done across the tops there. Set them in a little bit. So the last part for the main body of the coat's going to be that collar. And we'll do all the folds and stuff before we put the arms on. I like to do it in that order myself. So open this up so you can get to it a little better. To make it easier, we're going to start on that very center mark. See that mark that was there, either got rubbed off or I forgot it. But that center mark is going to match the center on this collar, which is going to go like that. Take a peek. If you're unsure, you can fold it. That will be right here. And I will clip just this one side. And you can see when it gets to that hole, there's going to be something a little fancy we do to make it look all good. And we'll reinforce that part too. So the collars will be reinforced where they come together. So because that represents one hole, this will have to stretch out and pull just a tiny bit to line up, so that that seam will come up and fold up when we're sewing it. Just keep an eye on the holes, and then we're good. And you can see why I start from the middle and come this way. It's a little bit easier to handle, plus the method for coming in and reinforcing that. And you'll see in a minute. Might as well just throw a clip right here too. So I'm starting, that center mark is in between these two holes. I'm starting just on the far side of that hole, or the mark I should say. And we're going to do one loop over the top to reinforce that. And we'll do the same when we come around. So there'll be a couple extra stitches, but it'll be right there underneath the back of the collar. Gives us a good starting point. And I'll hold that with a clip. And then I'm just going to start doing that double whip. We're only doing the double whip down, and then we'll separately do the saddle stitch. See, we have that one extra stitch straight over the top where we started. And I'm going to leave a clip over here so it doesn't put a lot of stress on that if this leather's pulling apart. So just go all the way down, and I'll be back in a second and show you where to stop and how to stop. Here's the reinforcement piece. We're not going to use that yet. I just want you to know that that's coming once we work our way with the saddle stitching. That first thread, I got to the end and then went over the top once. And I made sure to pinch it so it didn't bunch it weird. Went straight over the top. Holds it real nice. So we're going to do the same thing with this one now, is go just straight over the top. Don't overly tighten it. You do want it snug. And then this needle, we're going to come through that next hole. And we're just going to tie a knot right here because this piece is going to go over that, cover that knot up. And that really doesn't get shown either. You really have to flip the collar up and really look in there to find it. So we'll just do a knot right there. It's easy to overdo that. Then we're going to come back and start with the saddle stitching. I'm actually just going to leave those for now. I'm not going to clip them. I want to clip them a little bit closer to the knot, so I'm going to let that dry first. And we're going to go back and start that saddle stitch from there. And when we get to that end, we'll add this reinforcement piece. With the saddle stitch, I'm going to start right on that hole, which is, that center is in between these two holes, so I'm starting on that same hole just past that center. Even it up. We're just going to saddle stitch to the end, but when we get close to that, stop. So we're going to add that reinforcement piece. Just got it to the end here, which I believe is 7 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th hole back is where I stopped, because this reinforcement piece has 6 holes, which will go right here. It can be a little tricky to get this going, but it's important to have this piece in here. You really want where the two collars come together to be nice and strong. I'll actually just come through and then hit that last hole. Since it's loose, we actually can just go through one hole at a time here. And then what happened there? Oh, it just wrapped around. Okay, so we're just hitting that next hole. Looked a little weird, but basically this just goes over the top and you go straight through it with the next saddle stitch. I just did it one hole at a time because it was a little easier to get it going. And then it's going to be the same until we get to here, and these last 4 holes are only going to be through one side. They're not going to go through both. You can see I had to pull a couple stitches because what I did is I accidentally, this was pulled back so far, I hit that same hole again. So you really got to kind of pull that forward a little bit. Make sure you're hitting, and it can help to just go through that and do one hole at a time, because that next hole would be this one, which you can see better on that side. And I'll do the same for this side, just to make sure I'm hitting that correct hole. Okay, and then there should be 4 left, 4 left. However, I need to come back out. before I continue. Okay. Not this one. Okay, take your time. It's easy to make mistakes. I just came out the wrong one. Okay. There we go. And before I continue on these 4, which doesn't go through all the layers anymore, I will go around, or over the top I should say, just to hold all that together. So it is kind of tight if you need to just come out and then pop through that last layer, go for it. But it's tight because you really want that piece to be snug over the top to do its job. And that's really going to hold those 2 pieces, and these end up being collars. You don't want them coming apart. Make sure it's tight. Throw a clip on there. Now we're going to hit them last 4 holes. We'll just go through one at a time. Ride that skin close. You don't want to go all the way through and then back. You're going to grab a bunch of that wool, go in, ride the skin close, come out. Do that again. So this one, you got to kind of feel underneath for the hole. You can loosen it up and then retighten it. I usually just will feel for the hole, ride that skin on that second layer, and pop back out. Make sure it's snug. You don't want it bunching way up. Then I'll go through this next one again. And then I'll do the same on the other side here. Again, just getting it in there and then riding the skin to the next one so you don't grab a bunch of wool. You can get both layers. A little harder to do than to just pop out and come back. As long as you're getting that tightened up. Okay, so I'll just go through with this one, but I'm missing that other layer and coming in between the two, so then I can tie a knot and have it go back in there. You probably won't see it anyways, but might as well hide a knot if you're flipping your collar up. Who knows? Okay, with this side done, I am just going to go over the top of that again, but when I pop through, I'm going to pop through those layers like I did with that other needle, just like that, and we'll tie a knot, glue it in there, and that is done. So I did the exact same thing as before. I started one hole on the opposite side of that center mark went straight over the top and then just started double looping it through. So we'll have that straight over the top on each side of that center mark, and then it's going to be doubled up as far as that loop stitch goes as well. And you can do this however you want, really. As long as it looks uniform, you'll be just fine. I just go over so that center mark has a little more detail, a little more reinforced. Doesn't matter. I just started doing it that way, I don't know. I like it for some reason. We'll just continue all the way down with that double loop, and then we'll stop, do that saddle stitch, and then finish it off with that reinforcement piece. Since we already covered that, I'll just do this and then we'll get to the next step. So now we can do this fold over for the collars. We'll do this top collar separate, and then we'll do the rest of this around the jacket. First thing is to do these corners so they tuck in real nice. And how you're going to do that is grab this corner. You can see that hole and that hole are what we're sewing up to on these two sides. So we'll just grab that, stuff that wool in as best you can. Be a little bit tighter because there's not really anywhere for it to go inside. Clips. Get that going and then stuff the rest of this in there. Most of it's good. Don't need to go overboard, but do try to get it in there. So we'll start at the bottom here and work to that tip, because then we can tie a knot and that'll be completely tucked in there. Let's throw one more extra one down here a little bit so we're not fighting apart when we start sewing here. I am going to go over the end right here first. Over the side that all the stitches are on here. Just helps really hold that together. I'm not concerned with falling on the same side as the thread every time, or even going through the same side every time. All this is going to be hidden completely, so it doesn't matter. I'll try to come out so I pull that wool back down if it's going out on me. Like that, and push it back in. One more hole. You can go through, tie a knot on the side, you can tie it over the top of this, however you want to do it. But if you do it one way, do every corner that same way. I'll throw a little dab of glue on that, but so that's the gist of that. And that's like that, so we can tuck that in when we do that other fold and sew it. We'll have a nice point to the collar. I'm not going to force it in yet. I got to put a little glue on that knot here. We'll do this other corner the exact same way. And then there are 4 more corners all around. One on top of that, one on the bottom 2 corners, and then the other side of the top of this one. These aren't quite as pointed as this one, so they're just a tiny bit easier. But you might as well go ahead and do all of those at the same time. I'll go ahead and do all these corners. I already did the 2 bottom ones. I'll just finish these other 2 on the bottom part of the collar here, and then we'll start on the fold over hems, or whatever you want to call them. There's marks on the pattern too, to show you which hole to start on, which hole is the last in that line, and which hole you want to start on. Over the top. All the rest of these corners, I don't go to the front. It's narrower, a little bit less material. Not that it matters all that much. I just go over the top of that on that side of it versus the way I did that other sharper one to the front. Either way, as long as they're uniform, if it's the same on both sides, you'll be fine. So we're doing these hems where I'm folding this over, like 90-some% of all the sheepskin coats I've come across has masking tape. I know it sounds weird, but if you put just a thin strip of masking tape underneath where these fold over, it helps keep it from overly stretching over time, gives it just a little bit more rigidity, refined look. So I started doing it too. You don't want a massive piece going across the whole thing, just closer to those, and you can even go thinner than this. I just couldn't find something a little thinner, it was too thin, so I'm using this. And you're going to come up close to these stitches. Don't stretch and pull it the natural shape that it wants. I'll just start right here. Just butt it right up close to those holes. Don't need to go up into that corner. Press it down so it sticks. It doesn't seem like much, but you'd be surprised how much stretch that will hold and keep that length, and just ends up giving you a more refined looking coat. Not a huge deal. It's up to you if you want to add it. I started doing it and I just like how it looks. Not a huge difference, but I think over time it is going to make a difference. So again, I'm just right up, not into the corner, right up next to these holes. I'll stop and get this just flattened out how it naturally wants to be, the shape. And you can even rip it and just kind of start a new piece. I think I'll rip it right there actually. All of this is pretty easy if you take your time. But like before, that's the hardest part of the whole coat, I think. Those little reinforcement pieces. Everything else is just, if you put in the time and follow the video. And the difference with sewing this fold over is that we're not going to do 2 needles. I only put a needle on one end of the thread. We're going to tie a knot. So that first hole and first hole, I'll just come through, again staying close to the skin like we did before, because you don't want to go out and pull that wool. And this is exactly what I do with that sheepskin headband pattern. So if you've made one of those, you already know how this works. Don't overly tighten that one. So to get that knot to just butt up against the hole and have this thread coming straight out of that back hole, I'll just go right back down into that one, staying close to the skin. Pop back out this one. So now it's starting, coming straight from that hole, pulls that knot up against there. And now it's just back and forth. And staying close to the skin every time. Also, I'm using double the length. Even though it's just a single needle, I'm using double the length because that extra slack will come in handy, because we're going to want to leave a little bit so we can get to the holes and see them. We're not going to just tighten it right off the bat. And then it's that second hole right where that knot's butted up against. So just straight across, and straight across again. And then we'll start pulling those. First, let's stick these corners out. You don't have to get in there with anything sharp. Just your finger is enough to give that a nice point. And then that collar is going to look real nice when it's done. Now let's go ahead and do both sides. So once you get a few, you can start tightening it up. Make sure it tightens all the way back. And then the last couple will loosen up as you're taking a peek underneath here. And that's why that slack is good. By the time we get to the end, you want that extra slack so you can still get in here. And you can even go back and forth a couple times before you start pulling that. Take a peek. You can always go back and grab it and pull one at a time. A little bit of a task, but it can be done if you need to go back and tighten it up. But you can see once we get to that corner, it's pretty easy. You don't want to sew into where we sewed that edge, but that last hole will match right up with that last hole here. That's why there's no holes in between there. You just go to here and we'll hop across. You don't need to yank on this, you just want it good and snug. I'll often just put my hand on there, because if you grab here and pull, it's going to bunch that up too much. So just doing that, it makes it harder to overly pull it, and you're going to get them good and tight. So this might be a little harder for me to get on camera to see in here, but just open it up, check out the next hole one at a time. So that is, take it to the last hole. So we're going to come out, that's the last hole on the top. And then when we come into this one, just go straight across at that point, if that's the last hole. And if it's on the top, depending on how many holes you are, where you started, just do the opposite. Go across on the top and then continue on. Just keep the skin out of, or the fur out of the way. And then find that first hole on this one. And you can see it's back a little ways, so that it folds over and lines up nicely. And once you get a couple away from there, smooth sailing, go ahead and finish that up. And when you get to the other side, the end there, I'll show you how to tie a knot. You'll feel that when you fold this over, that's just past the fold. So after you sew that, you can feel it's kind of coming around. You can go back after the sewing and flatten that out so it bends over that bend a little better and flattens out. But wait till after you do the sewing to do that. So again, when you're pulling, grab back a little ways so that it just, and even grab where it's sewn so you don't bunch it up. But really, however you want to sew this last knot is fine. I like to go through that last hole and backtrack one just so it really pulls those last two together. I don't want to tie a knot there and allow that to separate a little bit. And then I'll tighten it. So I'll grab that last thread there. So I'll just go around that and loop to tie a knot. But before I pull that in there, I'm going to grab back and make sure I pull all those stitches tight. Pinch that and then pull that knot into there. And try to keep that as tight as possible because it can still loosen up, and do one or two more of those. And throw a little dab of glue on it. We're going to do that exact same thing starting on this one. This is that secondary collar. We're going to come all the way around. I'll push that in. This one you don't have to push it in as hard because it's more of a 90-degree corner. And then we're going to just go all the way around the bottom. But only grab as much thread as you're comfortable with working with, and then tie a knot and start again, because that's a long ways to go all the way around that coat. And before I get going, I will press this down. You can feel right where that tape is bending around. Just flatten that out. When you get to these buttonholes, I like to go through those like completely all the way through. I'm on that first hole, so I actually will go through, making sure to hit both sides. And then I'll come right back through. Pull it tight, make sure I don't have any wool. And again, just straight through instead of trying to just pick a layer. And then when it comes to these seams, let's get up to that seam here. You can really do it however you want. I like to do it so it falls onto one side or the other when this folds over. So I'll actually kind of get that fold already started. So I want this to pull to that side. So I'll come in, but I'll fall onto this side of that seam. And then I do the opposite. I'll come up, but come onto this side of the seam and pop out of that next hole. I'm not popping out on the other side of the seam because that's one hole technically. So then what happens is it's going to pull that to that side of the seam. You can see that it will pull it to the side. And I do that every time I pull it to the bottom. Either way, it's not really going to show. And then I keep going. So here's that collar we did. You can see I already went down the other side and around, and wherever it got me to is where I stopped. And then I grabbed a piece of thread that should get me to that end, which I can just tie the two together. But that secondary collar, it's the exact same thing. I tied a little knot in the last two. I'll go through this hole, so I pop up that first one. Like I said before, it just keeps it exactly straight back and forth from the holes. I'd like to point out, if you're coming across and you hit that last hole, let me loosen those up so I can point out what I'm talking about here. You don't actually use any of those holes on that seam we sewed earlier. When you get to the last hole next to it is when you come down and then just go across that gap to hit that other side and start doing the same thing. If for some reason you end on the top one, you can just come all the way across and pop out this one, or you can pop out here and come around that and then go across and out that one if you want that thread to be a little bit more, you know, held in there. Doesn't really matter, however you want to do it, but just keep in mind that any holes that the thread from that previous seam is going through sewn We're not using any of those holes because there's nothing on the opposite side to represent those. We just go back and forth and cut across to continue on. So from each side, the top of that collar I came around, and this is the bottom of the coat. And I just left each side loose so I can just tie them together when they meet up. So what I'll do is actually go past a stitch. So I want to make sure everything gets held together well. Make sure I don't go through the previous thread. So now I'll pull each side and then tie a knot. And I'll cut these and stuff them down in there. Just like that. I will go through and make sure that fold in that tape is nice. Onto the sleeves. Alright, figuring out which arm goes on which side. I have it laid out so that this is the right, this is the left. If you put this on your arm, you're gonna feel the difference. It's pretty easy to tell, but if you're still in doubt, you can grab the pattern and lay that out for the right arm. Make sure you're doing the right one. I'm going to go ahead and sew one of these on and then walk you through the process of sewing the other one. Now the sleeve should already be done, but this opening will have to be trimmed back if you're sewing the seams turned in. If you're sewing them out, it's like every other seam. Same as before. If you have a mark on your shaver, it helps. And be real careful when you come up to seams. Might be better to just grab a pair of scissors. The other thing too is, especially now, because you're going through this circle, it's easy to pull that up and cut into the leather. Just be real diligent about going slow and being careful. Last thing you want to do is cut into it at this point. So I'll just go around the whole opening. I'll flip it around so that this side, whatever side I'm cutting, is always kind of down on the table. I find it easier. You see I got one of the sleeves done here. The seam looks pretty good. It will stretch out and really set in nicely over time. So basically, we want to take, let me get that positioned in camera. We're going to take that opening, flip it inside out, and then that sleeve is going to pop right in. So this is the other side. And if you didn't mark specifically the very top mark right there with the arrow, do that now. And if you saved your other parts, it's a good time to make sure all those marks are on there. But what I'll do is, to be sure everything's set up right, you can start like this, throw that sleeve how it should be basically, and that center mark there, that's going to line up right with that seam across the shoulder. So I'll just grab that, make sure that's held together, and that's exactly how that's going to come up into that. You can start clipping it. Make sure you have it shaved back behind the holes on both sides nicely, and the cleaner it is, the better. The easier it'll be to see those holes. So that hole that's marked is dead center on that seam. And you can move these clips around. Let's just get started. Then I'll just move my way down, check for the next mark. There's going to be a little bit of easing to the pattern, so it has that nice three-dimensional shape to it. You can just go around and hit all the marks, or hit a mark and then throw some clips in between the two. I like to throw some clips on each side because whatever hand's holding it better, then I can just grab from that side. If you want, just temporarily throw a clip over on that opposite side to kind of hold it in place a little better. You'll see where the seams are. I usually just let them be whichever way they want to naturally fold. But where those seams are, this is going to probably need to stretch out just a little bit for that easing. So when I have slack on that outside, I'll let it be closer to the seam. Doesn't really matter. As you're sewing, everything has a way of just working itself out. Especially if you're hand sewing. If you stay on every hole, don't miss your stitches, you'll be good. Try to get those two edges to be lined up as well. And as you're sewing, we'll mess with that a little bit too, just to make sure those seams are nice and into the seam that we're sewing. So once you get through all your marks, there's going to be a little bit of space where you just got to even it out. Throw your clips on. Don't be afraid to remove a few clips and resituate some stuff if you feel like there's a little too much slack in one spot or the other. Just make sure where we started there, that top stays at that top, right at that seam across the shoulder. And I usually throw extra clips on. I'd rather have too many than not enough. So I think what I'll do too is I'll move over to my other videotaping table, get a nice up close view, and we'll skip that overhead view for the time being. Make sure we get a nice big view of what we're doing here. You can always kind of stretch it out if one's a little longer than the other. If you stretch it out a little and then clip it, it has a way of just making that ease go perfectly across there. Alright, so that's that. So I feel like that's a little too much right there, so I'm going to grab a couple and ease that out from that seam a little. Okay, I'll move over to the other table, get that other camera set up. I have 5 times the length. Do the double whip stitch first. That very top seam across the shoulder where that mark was to line up, I'm going to go back a couple. That way as we're going towards it, I can really dial it in and make sure we're hitting those holes right. It's really just a matter of keeping that wool out of the way. So if you have it coming from behind your thumb there, that helps. So we have quite a bit of thread here to deal with for a couple minutes, but once we get going, I will also just go over the top once. You can open it up, make sure you're hitting the hole. When you look from the back side too, make sure you're hitting that next one. As long as you're diligent about not skipping holes, you'll be totally fine. So sometimes I'll even leave a couple stitches loose just so I can really see what I'm doing here, and then bring that other one up to that seam. But right now, so having them loose, you can tell there's a little more fur right on the seam because I didn't want to clip into that knot or those threads under there. So that's the seam. Since I went through the seam, and that's that center hole, the next hole won't be the seam, it will be over. But just make sure you're hitting the next hole up top. I also like to make sure that seam is pulled up even with that edge. And if anything, it'd be just a little past it. I want to make sure it doesn't fall down and get underneath there and show. Sometimes it's good to grab a couple clips off of there to re-ease those two layers. So I'll clip that and come with the other one right away because I want to make sure I get across that seam, and then I can still loosen a couple up to make sure I'm hitting the right holes if I need to. Snug, but don't yank on it. We don't want to start tearing those holes. We'll go a little tighter when we do that saddle stitching. Pretty much the same tensions as before, but since we can't really see it, it's easy to pull too hard. So as long as you're maintaining what you were doing before, you should be just fine. So what I do is just maintain as if that seam wasn't there. I'm going to come through that same side of the seam. I'm not going to try to go to the other side. I'm just going to stay on that same side this time and pop out that same hole on that side of the seam. Same side that the previous thread went through. And get around that seam a little so it just squeezes that together. If you go over the top of it, you could kind of push it down. Really, as long as you're pulling your stitches tight and maintain how we were sewing before, it should come out just fine. Now we can go a little bit further with this one if we want. I just like to make sure I can get that first seam in there real good. And you don't have to worry as much about these other ones. They all just kind of fall into place. But that top one, being that it's so prominent on the top of the shoulder, and it gets a lot of stress, I make sure you fall on each side of it. Really squeeze it together. Don't go over the top. Probably not crucial. That's just always how I did it, and it gave me good results. So that's how I'm going to continue to do it. Just continue around, and again I'm going to pull a couple clips off just to let that ease in. Up to that next seam. Usually at this point I'll just go one all the way around and then the second, but just in case, if you're worried a little bit, you can go ahead and catch the other one up just to make sure you're hitting all the holes right. Not a bad idea. It looks like that one's directly across on the seam, but if I peek over here, there is one more that I need to hit first. And then this hole here is the one that is directly across on the seam. The seam's folded over this way. I'm just going to let it go the way it naturally wants to go, and then just fall on that side of the seam. If it starts to get a little misaligned, I'll throw a needle in there to kind of help move them around a little bit and get them situated. And then I'm just going through the same side of the seam that the other one came out of. And instead of trying to go right over the top of it, I'll just push it forward a little and go next to it. Just pushes and presses it all in. I'll be good to go. I'll just continue on and do every seam like that. There is one seam that's the opposite on that sleeve where it comes in. That's that one. Just treat it the same way as you do these other ones. The only thing is when you get to those, if they're trying to drop down on you, make sure you're pulling it up so it's even with that other piece, and even just a hair past it as you're sewing, because it will drop back down on you, just to make sure it doesn't fall too far down. And once we get to that point right here, I'll just tie a knot over the top, then we'll get that saddle stitching going. I just finished by tying a knot. You can come through and tie a knot on the side or wherever you want, really. So the top seam is right here, and I tied the knot and stopped right here, so I'll just kind of go in between there somewhere. Really, it's pretty irrelevant at this point. We're just going to go through and do that saddle stitch now. And here's that first seam right away, that top one on the shoulder. Basically just sew past it as if it isn't even there, keeping that wool out from underneath. Same as before too, when we're pulling these saddle stitches tight, get just a little bit of bunching. Since these stitches can kind of show a little bit, they really shouldn't, but they can. We're going to come through from the same side every time, hold the thread the same way, and then come back with the other needle the same way every time. Just in case they show, they'll still look nice and uniform. As you saw, I went right past that and just squeezed that together, just went right over it. That's how we're going to treat all of those other seams. Since these stitches can kind of show, they really shouldn't. But just in case, we're going to always come through from the same side first, hold the thread the same way each time, just to make sure they look uniform, whether they show a little bit or not. That'll really hold that down in there. Keep getting that little bit of bunching as you're sewing. We want that tight so the stitches will set later. As this loosens up, stretches out, stitches set in, they'll stay nice and tight without showing. I like to grab the thread, pull on it so I can get down and pinch and get all that wool out of the way. And as long as you get that wool out of the way, you can usually come up with that one. Just keep holding it, grab that, come right through with the next one. Or when you come through, you could grab it with this hand, just between a couple fingers, and use a couple other fingers to kind of open that up. So you can come through with that needle. Sure, you'll figure out a good way, something that'll speed it up for you. When you get to that one seam that's turned in on that sleeve, it comes up right here instead of out like all the other ones. When I go over the top of that, I make sure that that thread is pressed down a little bit so it grabs it and holds it up. If it gets too high, it can pop over the top. I really want to try to hold those seams as much as I can within the seam holding the two parts together, just to really use the strength in those seams we were making. I know it's a lot of seams this, seams that, but as long as you get that a little bit lower so it really grabs it, should be good. Got to the end here, tied a little knot. Looks good. The stitches will set in real nice. All right. And we're all done. Quite the project, but definitely rewarding.